300 and how many covers?
322.
How often was that consecutive weeks?
Not often. I think the most he ever did in 1 year was 11.
Were they controversial ever?
I don't remember the covers ever being controversial. I remember the Civil War the civil rights pieces in the 60s were, and then he actually helped out CORE, which was a radical left racial rights group in New York City. That was a bit controversial. But the post covers, the only thing I remember is when he would do one. There was one with a young girl who you couldn't quite be sure she was a girl or boy, and he got a real overspill of letters on, not so much on that he should have been clear about the gender, but that what was he doing making a girl look so sloppy, or what was he doing making a boy look so connected to girlish things, which I find fascinating.
How many biographies have been written about Norman Rockwell?
In the conventional sense of a kind of soup to nuts biography, this is the first one. There are several partial stories, and he wrote an autobiography in 1959.
How did you go about doing this?
Well, when I became very serious about it and realized I was determined this was a life I wanted to pursue, I wrote his middle son, Tom Rockwell, and said, could we meet? And expecting that this would be a drawn-out, year-long process, because often it is when you're trying to get the family's cooperation. And to my shock, I got an immediate response, come up and see me in Poughkeepsie, New York. So,
what's he doing?
He's a writer of children's books, and his wife's an illustrator. They live on a farm. They've had for some years. Lovely man.
Why did you write Tom and not Peter or Jarvis?
Somehow I had been told, and I don't remember how I knew, but I'd been told that he was the executor of the estate, so I knew he was the right person.
How old is he now?
The three sons are in their 60s, all three of them, within 6 years of each other. So anyway, he had me up to Poughkeepsie, and it just happened. When we sat there, he said, I'll tell you that I've been waiting. We've decided, the family, that now is a good time to be honest, to be open, and do you use footnotes? And I said, I was taken aback. I said, well, what do you mean? I'm a scholar, of course and he said, because we've had people who wanted to do it and didn't want to document or use scholarship. And I said, well, of course. And I thought that was a very sweet question, though, and he's a highly intelligent man, and a kind of gentle way of saying. So he asked me to send him a copy of my book that was then coming out, and I did, and we talked some more, and then the three brothers had to talk, and it wasn't that they had to authorize it. I wouldn't write an authorized biography anyway, but I thought it would be paying it, not giving it its due, the subject, if I didn't have the family's cooperation at all.
What about the other two brothers? Where are they?
One's in Rome. He's a sculptor, stone carver, Peter, the youngest, and then the oldest, Jarvis, is in Great Barrington, Massachusetts.
Did you talk to all three?
Oh, time and time and time again. In fact, it was wonderful. I got to go to Tuscany and spend part of the summer with Peter and his wife, and I had thought, gee, this is one book that will keep me right in the Northeast. Unfortunately, I won't get to travel, but who would guess? And Great Barrington, Jarvis, they were all so open to meeting me wherever and whenever I needed.
I think you mentioned from time to time he had a journal of some kind.
That he did, or that I did?
Norman Rockwell.
Yes, he did. And this was a little find. One day I was going through one of the boxes in the museum archives, and it's a room, a large room that's just stocked with boxes and memorabilia. Some of it has not been cataloged. So I was going through one of the boxes that everybody thought had been filed properly, and there was a small old journal that it turned out was Rockwell's private diary from the 1930s. He had taken a camping trip, and it was this wonderful moment of discovery where I called over the archivist, Linda Perro, and she was excited because she knows just about everything, and she hadn't seen this. And we went through it, and then she told one of the sons, and he was excited because it was just nice to read an uncensored account that Rockwell clearly did not mean for public consumption of what it was like for him to go camping for 6 days when his two young sons were back at home with his wife, and what he thought of.
But there are other references to either a calendar or something where he would, I know,
late in
his life, yeah.
Yes, that was very good too. Almost at the end of when I was finishing the biography, Tom Rockwell decided that to share with me the calendars that his father had kept the last 10 years of his life. And Rockwell would just jot down things that had happened during the day, or things he was worried about, or what was coming up, or what had happened. And it was unbelievably helpful to get a sense of where his thinking was during those last 10 years of his life. To go through, it's actually, at this point, I guess there were those little pages you put on a Rolodex, I mean, what do you call it, where the spiral thing. And so they had been taken off and each year banded with, with rubber band. So you can just kind of go through each page.
Where did you go to find things Rockwell besides the sons?
Well, the museum archives, which is an unusual resource. Usually when you're doing a biography, you have to go everywhere for years to collect what they've already collected, so that was lovely.
Where is it?
That's in Stockbridge at the museum. And then I also went, I just tried to ferret out, like biographers do, anybody who'd had any connection with Rockwell, or who was close to someone who had been Rockwell's friend or associate. Because, so for instance, I met with somebody who had been his housekeeper at the end of his life.
Name?
Virginia Lovelace, a wonderful woman, has a farmhouse, and what was interesting to me is to watch her trust unfold, where over the years I stayed with her often at the farmhouse, and she decided I was all right, and she would share more and more of a more intimate nature.
Give us some of the things that you learned from her that are important to the book.
All right, this sounds so trivial, but it helped reassure me of something I wondered about. The third marriage, I hope this doesn't sound too prurient, but the third marriage was, Rockwell was in his 60s and had lost his wife 2 years before to an unexplained death, and it was very traumatic for him. And he was then the hot bachelor in town in Stockbridge, because you can imagine the women who weren't married who were pursuing him then.
Let me ask you about Stockbridge. Where is it in the world?
Stockbridge is within 10 minutes of the New York state line, and it's in Massachusetts. And
west end of Massachusetts?
I'm so bad. East from New York, obviously, but
not east like Boston. It's
in the
at the other
Berkshires,
end of the,
right, in the Berkshires, absolutely.
What's it like there?
On the surface, it's a lovely little New England small town, cosmetically attractive, and all those white picket picket fence ways, full of intellectuals, full of artists, very little obvious activity that would sustain it financially, and yet quite a bit of wealth there. So
you have a picture in the book. It's some years ago. Does it still look like this?
You know, it does. If you change the cars, update the cars to the early 21st century, that's pretty much what it looks like.
And you say Norman Rockwell's looking out through that big picture window up there?
Yes.
What was that?
He had that window put in. When he moved to Stockbridge, he actually had a studio. That was the studio, and he created it above a butcher shop. And he needed good northern light, so he had the front knocked out and that glass put in. And he liked to just kind of look over the town during the day and to see what was going on, to paint. So
now that we've seen a little bit of the town, go back to the housekeeper and her name again?
So Virginia Lovelace. And her husband, or ex-husband, had been an art director at Austin Riggs at the institution there for treatment of mental illness. And Mary, Rockwell's second wife, had been treated there for 10 years, and Rockwell himself had started analysis there and therapy for his depression. So she knew a lot. They'd socialized together, been at parties with Eric Erikson, the psychoanalyst, and had heard a lot. So but then the point is that when the second wife died and Rockwell was about to remarry, he ended up choosing a school teacher who had never been married. She was in her 60s, and who seemed quite prim and proper. And one of the sons told me that, in fact, Rockwell had shared with him that he was worried what their sexual life would be after marriage. He was just worried because he didn't know, he said. And so I asked Virginia, I said, you were the housekeeper. You lived with them the last years of their lives. What do you think? And she said, well, I'll think about this. Very proper woman. And so then the next time I saw her, she said, I want to share with you that I am sure that the Rockwells enjoyed a lovely, passionate, and intimate relationship. And that kind of thing. And she just told me a few substantiating details. But the point being that I became convinced that that what looked like their happiness was on all levels.
So the three sons and the housekeeper, anybody else that was close to him or understood him very well?
Well, I mean, so many. For instance, one of my research assistants got in touch with a woman who her family had been friends with the first wife's family back in the 20s, which was hard to get at because that's, you're going back there in time. And she wrote wonderful letters to me about what people knew about that wife, about their life, about what had happened during certain situations. So that was a personal contact.